You have to learn Kubernetes right now. Look, I'm recording with a 24mm lens and peeling my eyes as wide open as I can so you can see how green my eyes are. So I can exploit that for impressions on YouTube. Learn Kubernetes right now. Right now. I'm Network Chuck and I do this. Jesus Christ. So I want to fucking rant, right? I want to rant for a while. I've been working pretty extensively with Kubernetes recently. I have an acquired taste for it now. I like it actually a lot. But Kubernetes is kind of weird for a lot of things. So welcome to 7 things I love and hate about Kubernetes. Hate that you're negative Nancy. I'm not a negative Nancy. I don't like whiners. I'm not for whiners. Okay. But that being said, I think that so it is valid to express your points of view sometimes, because I mean hopefully somebody in the Kubernetes team is gonna listen to them, and maybe over time that can lead to changes in the actual product, right? I mean wishful thinking, but so 7 things I hate about Kubernetes. Let's start with the hate. So number 1, I think that Kubernetes is not newbie friendly at all. Like even if you're a seasoned engineer, even if you have deployed a lot of stuff, even at scale, Kubernetes is not intuitive at all. There's way too much craft in it. The learning curve is very steep. I wish that there was a way to get started in a simpler manner with it. You go to one tutorial and they tell you, oh, use Minikube, use this, use that. You go to another tutorial and they teach you to use Kubernetes in another way. You go to, so there's all of that, noise going in. Then you have to deal with other things about it which complicate the matter. Kubernetes works by having you as an engineer declare an ideal state of the application, and then internally Kubernetes runs control loops which continuously look at the real world and at the ideal state and try to reconcile the current state of the system with the ideal state, right? That's why it's called Kubernetes. It's from Greek, Kybernetes. That's the same etymological root as cybernetic, right? And it alludes again to that idea of control loops. It also alludes to the idea of the helmsman, right? Of like a ship helmsman. So, okay, but what's the problem with Kubernetes 2? It extensively uses technologies like YAML to declare that ideal state. You can also use JSON. There's also other ways to serialize Kubernetes manifest. But YAML by nature is super bad. Let me show you something. I think, well, most people probably already know about this, right? Please read noyaml.com. Nobody wants to write YAML, right? So a lot of amazing criticism about YAML. So the parser is chaos, the format is chaos, it's really easy to fuck things up. There's it's possible to deploy things to production, so there's no safety as in, oh, so this is valid YAML, this shouldn't break. I don't want to quote this because personally I have never run into this, that supposedly a version of the YAML parser allows to specify no and it gets interpreted as a boolean. I've never run into that, but So this is something that really catches my eye. So let's say that somebody has a certain domain model to express a certain function, and they serialize things like this, right? And then, okay, so another system, and they're just gonna, do something that looks dangerously similar to that, but with a completely confusing different schema, right? Oh, so what is this? Oh, it's an element in a list. Oh, how was I supposed to know that? And then another system, oh yeah, I'm just gonna arbitrarily decide this and this and this and this and that, right? So this reminds me of the zen of Python. Explicit is better than implicit, and there's a lot of givens here. There's a lot of things that are very implicit here, and I don't really like that. So that's part of the horrible learning curve, right? I ran into something today while I was working on this. So this is a manifest for something that I was doing today. This is part of the problem, as in this is part of the horrible learning curve. So I'm using a definition of an ingress. Granted, again, like I said, there's a newer version now, but I'm stuck with this because I'm running Kubernetes 17 because my platform doesn't support newer versions. So what's the problem? So you have the specification and then rules, and then there's this is HTTP and this is a field. How was I supposed to know that? Well, so everything in programming, the reason why people are such fanatics of static typing now is because we like it when things have a defined shape, when everything has a specific, nice, defined shapes to themselves, because an IDE can grab that schema, that shape, and auto-populate things. I type dot, and it shows you, oh, do you want dot this field, dot that field, dot that field. That reduces confusion when programming. How was I supposed to know that, right? How was I supposed to know that there's rules, and then there's this, and then there's another field, which is TLS? Now, so this is because I'm doing SSL handshake at the ingress level, right? But see what I mean? This is, for a newbie, this is not easy to glean. This is confusing. This is obtuse, right? A newbie is not gonna have a very good time with this. Which leads me to the next point, right? YAML is pretty bad. The documentation is scarce or null and difficult to access. So again, I said that I'm Kubernetes documentation, right? So you go to the Kubernetes documentation and you have all of this. How am I supposed to know what I'm supposed to browse for? Oh, so let's say that, well, okay, so I'm gonna search for this, right? Okay, so this is not very friendly. So let's say that we have this, right? Okay, so why or how or when? So let's say no, but just get me the schema of that. Get me a schema of that. Where's the schema of that? How am I supposed to find that? Before you mention, I use the Visual Studio Code integration. I've used the IDE integrations. They're not any better. They're not any better. You don't really get that ideal behavior of I type dot and I get a list of suggestions for fields and attributes. How am I supposed? Okay, what if I want to see the schema for something on Kubernetes 17, right? It's not easy to find that. So there's documentation, right? So you see what I mean? So the documentation is not very accessible. So of course, again, so let's see schema of this. So it is there because I've seen it. Well, this is a third-party thing, right? This is ingress, networking case, B1. Well, that's the new one. That's not the beta one that I want. So it's even worse. B1, beta 1. So this is go. So, and see, and do you notice how this is just becoming more and more and more complicated? This is not very, again, to a newbie, all of this is just daring. So the documentation is, if this was nicer, I want to see the schema of ingress. If this was easier somehow, then I will have no complaints in this front. But as it stands, so you can sort of like, you know, deduce what to do here out of these examples. But this is a third party, so what the fuck, right? Okay, so let's say that we buy the bullet and we're reading this, even though it's from some third party. So, well, so this is the domain model. These all of the fields in this. Then there's metadata. Okay, so object meta. That's not a very good domain name. Then there's, this is way too complex. When am I supposed to know when to apply any of this? Who knows? So, okay, type. And the field is called resource, and the type is type local object reference. That's not a very good domain name. It makes sense once you know how to think about it, but it doesn't usually, like, this is just too obtuse, right? So that's the first point out of the 7 about why I hate Kubernetes. So next point. So there's kubectl. So kubectl works. It's actually a very good tool. It's really smart. It works very well, but it's not very appealing, right? O equals YAML. kubectl. It is a good tool, but it's not a very appealing tool. Kubernetes actually started clicking with me once I used K9, which is this, but this is a third-party tool. But it makes a lot of these things more approachable, more understandable. Again, the user experience does matter, right? Bots, oh, there we go. So those are my bots. Oh, okay, so I can describe them, so I can see, like, oh, okay, so you know what I mean? Oh, okay, so those are my logs and everything. Again, you can do all of this perfectly fine with kubectl, but it's not as inviting as this, right? Alright, so that's the next problem. So kubectl is not a very friendly tool. It works, but my next point about why I hate Kubernetes is that, so if you notice, you're bending your brain to think the way Kubernetes does. Ideally, you will aim for the contrary. Kubernetes will be intuitive enough such that you can naturally express what you want to deploy, what you want to do with your system in a way that's, humanly intuitive. And Kubernetes will easily lead you into modeling things like that, right? But you kind of have to do it backwards, right? It's even worse when you consider that online most people are just copying and pasting sort of little snippets of YAML and throwing them around. Oh, do this, do this, do that. Oh, but don't do this. Oh, but do this, do this, do that. And so that's kind of like, just chaotic. It doesn't lead to a very good experience. You end up with Frankenstein manifests made out of little patches of things cobbled from everywhere, and I don't think that's a positive experience. Next point why I hate Kubernetes. And everything feels over-engineered. When you finally understand what everything is doing, so it makes sense, but for most people, a lot of the ways that things are implemented just feel over-engineered. It feels as if there's bloat everywhere. You have to install several gigabytes to get the Docker runtime in your system, several gigabytes to get Kubernetes, then you produce a lot of images, you deploy a lot of images, you end up deploying a lot of resources that you don't even have the faintest idea what they do on your cluster. And you sort of just leave them running there because, well, I'm scared that I'm gonna break something if I remove. So everything feels bloated and over-engineered. This is very sad, but the next point, and I'm gonna call it out, is that there's a lot of elitism in the Kubernetes community. There's a lot of really cool people, and I really like a lot of the people in the Kubernetes community. But a lot of people are kind of like, they kind of have this idea that, oh, it's obvious that Kubernetes works this way, and if you didn't get the revelation by divine providence, it's because you're not part of the clique and woe is you, right? It's because you're not an Eurasian technocast elite like me. And you sort of get that feeling when you read through, in some communities, there's a lot of people who are on the other side of the scale. There's a lot of people who are incredibly positive and incredibly cool, and I owe a lot to them. But let's be frank, there's a lot of elitism here. There's a lot of elitism about. If you're not a Golang programmer, oh, like, don't you even dare talk to me because if you don't do everything in Golang, it means you're inferior. Golang is actually pretty nice, and it's pretty cool and it's pretty fun actually. But the community tends to be elitist. You don't have to do everything in Golang. You don't have to say, "Oh, Golang is the end all be all," and if you don't know exactly how to do everything there, then woe is you. And you sort of get that vibe from the community sometimes. The Ruby community has a principle called min_swan. Mats is nice, so we are nice. min_swan. That's the acronym representing that. I owe a lot to the Ruby community from back then. A lot of people really hold it really close to the heart that, all of us were newbies at one point. All of us made stupid questions on IRC, and all of us, we got help at some point. We had somebody who was kind enough to point us in the right direction. So don't be an elitist, don't be an asshole towards the newbies, right? And I hope, I really wish that the Golang community had more of that. So it is positive. It is a positive community. There's some very negative programming communities, and Golang isn't that. But it veers towards elitism. Kubernetes veers towards elitism itself. There's a lot of people who are Kubernetes fanatics. Oh, everything on Kubernetes, everything now, Kubernetes, now. If you're not doing Kubernetes, then no, I don't want to listen to it. Like, also, that's not the right way to go about things. Next thing, the sixth thing that I hate about Kubernetes, there's constant churn. Everything is changing in Kubernetes all the time because the cloud ecosystem is violently changing every quarter. So I do understand that, but this leads to fragmentation. I bought my Turing Pi in late 2019 probably. So I bought that, and it's almost impossible to find good documentation about what to do with Turing Pi V1 because by now there's Turing Pi V2. It is more complicated to find Kubernetes 1.17 documentation. So everything is unclear, everything is fragmented. You get a minor version of something, and in semantic versioning, a minor version is supposed to be something that's compatible, that's backwards compatible with a previous minor version. Major versions are for when things are not backwards compatible, right? But in Kubernetes, that breaks things all the time. You go from 1.1 to 1.2, nothing is going to work. So that leads to a lot of churn and to a lot of stress. CRDs, so I do understand them now, but again, if you're not, for the uninitiated, that's just gonna be a horrible time. You're just gonna have a terrible time with CRDs. And again, nothing is very clear. Final point about what I heard about Kubernetes. You don't actually need Kubernetes. For most intents and purposes, you don't actually even need Kubernetes. You can deploy things at scale without depending on container runtimes. If you know what you're doing, it's great. It does help. It does help a lot. It is pretty appropriate for the enterprise. But guess what? Not everyone is the enterprise. If you're a startup, you don't need Kubernetes. Don't fall into that trap. We're going to end up paying a massive AWS EKS bill. You don't need that. You don't need to do any of that. You can do it as a learning experience. You can do it for big box, big tech enterprises. But most people, for most intents and purposes, you don't need Kubernetes. Now that we covered everything that I hate about Kubernetes, let me talk about what I love about it. When it works, it's very good. Oh, it's magic. And it's pretty amazing and sophisticated. But it takes like a year of constantly freaking up with Kubernetes to get to that point. There's a lot of really cool people in the community. A lot of people are creating things for the Kubernetes system, and that's pretty cool. Containers are very good. Kubernetes has sort of abandoned Docker now because there's kind of a little bit of a feud there, right? There's a lot of money that, that they want that they want to that they want to direct a certain way rather than to direct into Docker Incorporated. But containers are pretty good. You're aiming for loose coupling, and that's the second thing. That's the third thing that I like about Kubernetes. You're aiming for a state where your infrastructure has components that are easy to replace and easy to clone, right? Having immutable, stateless applications is a good thing. So those are great design principles for your infrastructure. Next thing, the fourth thing that I love about Kubernetes, it's really fun. Setting up a cluster is very fun. When things click, it's amazing. And I do recommend everyone to get into it. When it works, it's fun and it's pretty great. I think that that's a part of the tech experience that one should never skip. So the cloud is convenient, but this kind of world where everything is virtual and abstracted is kind of negative because it can erode expertise in things. Do you want to be in a world when nobody knows how to set up a network because, oh, Amazon does it for cheap? You don't have to. When nobody knows how to actually deal with the nuts and bolts on a server rack. And I tell you, as somebody who has done that, I had the bloody nails and the bloody knuckles to prove for that. I've done that, and that's a part of the growing up that I think that nobody should skip up on. Another thing that I love about Kubernetes is that it makes multi-cloud easier. So multi-cloud, so it's kind of like this pie in the sky goal. It's easier said than done, but effectively Kubernetes is a common substrate everywhere you go. So you can mount Kubernetes on anything as long as it's an actual server. So if you have 3 Kubernetes clusters, on different clouds, you can deploy your application easily with all 3 of them. Again, it's easier said than done, but having a common API, Kubernetes then does will be like a common API no matter where you go. That's a really cool thing, and you may be interested in going multi-cloud because it helps you deal even better with resiliency. No more, oh, so we're down because AWS had threw a tantrum and it's down for today, and we're down because we depend on AWS, right? So no more of that, right? I realize that that's not 7 things that I love about Kubernetes, but I tried really hard to find 7 things that I loved about it, and unfortunately I was not able to find them. So anyway, so I think that's all that I wanted to say on that front for now, okay?